The sound of glass shattering against the wall made her jump. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway of her childhood home, watching her father's face turn red with anger. His words cut through her like a knife. "You will marry him in your sister's place and that's final," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "Jennifer ran away with that worthless boyfriend of hers last night. The wedding is in 3 days. Do you know what will happen if we cancel? Your mother and I will lose everything." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her sister Jennifer had been engaged to David Wilson, one of the richest men in the country. A blind billionaire who had never seen Jennifer's face but had fallen for her company and conversation during their arranged meetings. Their families had business ties going back decades, and this marriage would save her parents from bankruptcy. "But father, he thinks he's marrying Jennifer. This is crazy. It's wrong," Sarah protested, her voice shaking. Her mother, who had been quietly crying in the corner, finally spoke up. "David has never seen Jennifer. He's been blind since birth. He knows her by her voice, by her presence. You two sound similar enough. You can do this, Sarah. You must do this." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. How could they ask this of her? To marry a man who thought she was someone else? A man who was in love with the idea of her sister? "He'll find out eventually," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father's expression hardened. "By then the contracts will be signed. The money will be transferred. Our family will be saved." Sarah looked at her parents, these people she had loved and respected her whole life, now asking her to live a lie. She thought about Jennifer, who had always been the pretty one, the charming one, the one everyone loved. Jennifer, who had now abandoned them all for love. "What about what I want?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. "Sometimes we must sacrifice for family," her father replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sarah felt trapped, cornered by her family's desperation and her sister's selfishness. In 3 days she would walk down the aisle to marry a blind billionaire who thought she was someone else. A man who had never seen her plain face, her ordinary brown eyes, her simple appearance that had always made her invisible next to her beautiful sister. How long could she keep up this deception? What would happen when he discovered the truth? And most troubling of all, what would happen if she began to care for him? Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. This was going to be the biggest mistake of her life, but she didn't see any way out. The weight of her family's future pressed down on her shoulders, and she felt herself giving in. "I'll do it," she whispered, sealing her fate with those 3 small words. What she didn't know then was that this forced marriage would change everything she thought she knew about love, truth, and herself. The deception that began that day would lead her down a path she never expected, toward a man who might love her not for her face, but for who she truly was. If only she could keep the truth hidden long enough to discover if what they might build together was real. 3 days passed in a blur of frantic preparations. Sarah stood in the bride's room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The wedding dress had been made for Jennifer, taller, slimmer Jennifer with her perfect posture and confident smile. On Sarah, it looked wrong somehow, like she was playing dress-up in someone else's clothes. Which she supposed she was. "You look beautiful," her mother said, adjusting the veil. "Remember what we practiced. Lower your voice slightly when you speak. Jennifer always talks a bit slower than you do. And remember your posture." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. She had spent the last 3 days learning to be her sister, practicing Jennifer's laugh, her way of speaking, even the light floral perfume Jennifer always wore. "Has anyone told him?" Sarah asked. "Does he know Jennifer ran away?" Her mother's hand stilled. "No. It would ruin everything. David's family is just as invested in this merger as we are. If he backs out now..." The unspoken threat hung in the air between them. Financial ruin. Disgrace. The collapse of everything her parents had built. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was time. Sarah walked down the aisle on shaky legs, her father's arm linked through hers. She could feel the eyes of 200 guests on her, but the only person who couldn't see her was the one waiting at the altar. David Wilson stood tall and straight, his unseeing eyes directed forward. He was handsome in a way Sarah hadn't expected. Strong jawline, kind mouth, dark hair neatly trimmed. He wore dark glasses, and his hands were clasped in front of him, his head tilting slightly as he listened to her approach. When her father placed her hand in David's, Sarah felt a jolt of something unexpected. His touch was gentle but sure, his skin warm against hers. "Jennifer," he whispered, and Sarah's heart sank at the deception. The ceremony passed in a daze of repeated vows and practiced responses. Sarah kept her voice low and measured, the way Jennifer would have spoken. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, David leaned down to kiss her, and Sarah felt a moment of panic. Would he somehow know? Would he sense that these weren't Jennifer's lips? But the kiss was brief and formal, appropriate for the setting, and then it was over. She was married to a man who thought she was someone else. At the reception, Sarah navigated a minefield of conversations with people who knew Jennifer well. David kept her close, his hand at her elbow, guiding her even though he was the one who couldn't see. "You're quiet today," he said when they had a moment alone. "Are you nervous?" Sarah swallowed hard. "Yes," she admitted truthfully. "This is all happening so fast." David smiled, and the gentleness in his expression made her chest ache. "I know we didn't have much time to get to know each other before our families arranged this. But I want you to know I'm glad it's you, Jennifer. From our conversations I feel like I've found someone special." Guilt crashed over Sarah like a wave. He had never spoken to her before today. Those conversations, those connections he valued had been with Jennifer, not her. "We should get to know each other better," she said carefully. "Maybe we could start over, in a way." David tilted his head, considering. "I'd like that. A fresh start, just the two of us, away from our family's expectations." As the reception continued, Sarah found herself studying her new husband. He moved with surprising confidence for someone who couldn't see, his other senses clearly compensating. He laughed easily with guests, remembered names and details from conversations, and showed a warmth that seemed genuine rather than practiced. By the time they left for the hotel where they would spend their first night before flying to their honeymoon destination, Sarah was exhausted from the effort of being someone else. In the privacy of their suite, David loosened his tie and sat on the edge of the bed. "Would you mind if we just talked tonight?" he asked. "I know what's expected, but I'd rather we take our time. Get comfortable with each other first." Relief flooded through Sarah. "I'd like that," she said, forgetting for a moment to use Jennifer's speech patterns. David frowned slightly. "Your voice sounds different." Sarah's heart stopped. "I'm just tired," she said quickly. "It's been a long day." He nodded, accepting the explanation. "Tell me something about yourself that I don't know yet. Something real, not the polished version our families have been pushing forward." Sarah hesitated. This was dangerous territory. But maybe, just maybe, she could start being honest about small things even if the big lie remained. "I love rainy days," she said softly. "Everyone always wants sunshine, but I love the sound of rain on windows. The way the world gets quiet and still." David smiled. "I didn't know that about you. I love rain too. The way it changes the smells in the air makes everything sharper somehow." He paused. "See? We're learning new things already." As they talked into the night, Sarah felt the strangest sensation. For the first time, someone was actually listening to her, not looking past her to find Jennifer, not comparing her unfavorably to her sister. In David's darkness, she was finally being seen. But the guilt remained, a heavy stone in her stomach. This connection, as real as it felt, was built on a lie that grew larger with every passing moment. The private island in the Caribbean was everything a honeymoon destination should be. White sand beaches, crystal clear water, and complete privacy. The staff of their luxury villa appeared only when needed and vanished just as quickly, leaving Sarah and David alone in their paradise. Sarah had managed to keep up her deception through the first day, carefully mimicking Jennifer's speech patterns and mannerisms. But it was exhausting, being constantly on guard, never able to relax or be herself. On their second evening, they sat on the beach after dinner, listening to the waves. The staff had set up comfortable chairs and left them with a bottle of champagne before discreetly disappearing. "Tell me what you see," David said suddenly. "What?" Sarah asked, startled. "The sunset. The beach. Describe it to me." His voice was soft, curious. "I want to see it through your eyes." Sarah looked out at the horizon where the sun was sinking into the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. No one had ever asked her to describe anything before. She had always been the quiet one, the overlooked one. "The sun is just touching the water," she began hesitantly. "It's like a perfect orange ball, making the clouds around it turn pink and purple. The ocean looks like it's on fire where the sunlight hits it. There are little ripples of gold on every wave." She continued describing the scene, finding words for colors and textures she had never tried to express before. As she spoke, she forgot to be Jennifer. She was just Sarah, sharing something beautiful with someone who wanted to hear her thoughts. When she finally fell silent, David was smiling. "You have a gift for description," he said. "I could almost see it." "Thank you," Sarah replied, forgetting to lower her voice the way Jennifer would. David tilted his head slightly. "You know, you sound different when you're relaxed." When you're not thinking about how you're supposed to sound. Sarah froze. What do you mean? Just that. He hesitated. When we first met at those family dinners, you were always so carefully spoken. Like you were choosing every word. Now you seem more natural. Oh. Sarah's heart was pounding. I guess I'm more comfortable with you now. David reached out, finding her hand with surprising accuracy. I'm glad. I want you to be yourself with me, Jennifer. Not who your parents want you to be. The irony of his words made Sarah's chest ache. She was being herself, more herself than she had ever been allowed to be, and yet the deception grew deeper with every genuine moment they shared. Over the next few days they fell into a routine. Mornings spent exploring the island, afternoons reading to each other in the shade, evenings talking for hours. David was intelligent, thoughtful, and surprisingly funny. He never seemed bothered by his blindness, navigating the world with confidence born of a lifetime of adaptation. To Sarah's surprise, he was a skilled swimmer, explaining that water was one of the few places where his blindness didn't matter much. It's all about feeling the currents, he told her as they floated in the warm ocean. Listening to the waves. I don't need to see to know where I am. On their fifth night, after a dinner served under the stars, David asked about her childhood. Tell me something about growing up. Something real. Sarah hesitated. Every personal story was dangerous territory. Jennifer's childhood was not her own, and any detail could reveal the truth. I was always in the shadow of my sister, she said finally, unable to help herself. It was the truth after all, just not in the way he would understand it. David frowned. I didn't know you felt that way. Your parents always spoke of you as the star of the family. Sarah almost laughed. Of course they had. Jennifer had always been the golden child. Parents see what they want to see, she said carefully. What about your sister? The one whose shadow you felt you were in. Sarah swallowed hard. This was treacherous ground. She was always the one everyone noticed. The pretty one. The confident one. And yet here you are, successful and accomplished in your own right, David said. Clearly you found your way out of that shadow. The kindness in his voice made Sarah want to cry. If only he knew the truth, that she was the overlooked sister, the plain one, the replacement bride. What about you? She asked, desperate to change the subject. What was it like growing up blind? David leaned back in his chair, considering. People always expect some tragic story, but honestly, I don't know any different. I was born this way. My parents never treated me like I was broken or missing something essential. They just helped me find different ways to experience the world. That sounds nice, Sarah said softly. It was. He paused. There was a doctor, when I was 16, who thought he might be able to give me partial sight through an experimental procedure. My parents wanted me to try it, but I refused. Why? Sarah asked, genuinely curious. David shrugged. I'd built my life around my other senses. The way I experienced the world was complete in its own way. I didn't want to change that just because others thought sight was necessary for a full life. Sarah considered this. Do you ever wonder what people look like? The people in your life. Sometimes, he admitted. But I know people in ways others don't. I know them by their footsteps, their breathing patterns, the subtle changes in their voice that reveal their emotions. I know when someone is truly happy or just pretending to be. I can hear the difference. Sarah felt a chill. Could he hear the deception in her voice? Had he known all along? What do you think I look like? She asked, heart pounding. David smiled. I think you're beautiful, he said simply. Not because someone told me, though people have. But because of the way your voice softens when you talk about things you love. Because of how gentle your hands are when you touch my arm to guide me, even though I don't need guidance. Because of how you laugh, not the careful laugh you use in public, but the real one I've started to hear more often. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. He was describing her, the real her, not Jennifer. Somehow, without seeing her, he had begun to know the person she truly was. You're crying, he said suddenly. Sarah wiped her eyes quickly. How did you know? Your breathing changed. And you went very still. He reached out, finding her cheek with his fingertips, touching a tear she had missed. What's wrong? Nothing, she whispered. I'm just happy. And in that moment, despite the lie that lay between them, she realized it was true. 2 weeks into their honeymoon, Sarah woke before dawn. David was still sleeping beside her, his face peaceful in repose. They had grown closer each day, talking for hours, sharing thoughts and dreams. Though they had begun sharing a bed, David had been remarkably patient, never pushing for more intimacy than Sarah was ready for. The guilt that had been her constant companion since the wedding had not disappeared, but it had changed. At first she had felt guilty for deceiving David. Now she felt guilty for how much she was beginning to care for him, knowing that when he discovered the truth, whatever was growing between them would be destroyed. Sarah slipped out of bed and went to sit on the balcony, watching the first hints of sunrise color the horizon. Their honeymoon was nearly over. Soon they would return to real life, to the company David ran, to the watchful eyes of both their families. How much longer could she maintain this deception? She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear David approach until he spoke. "You're up early," he said, stepping onto the balcony. He moved with confident familiarity, having memorized the layout of their villa within days of arriving. "Just watching the sunrise," Sarah replied. David sat in the chair beside her. "Describe it to me?" This had become a ritual between them. Sarah would describe what she saw, and David would listen, building the image in his mind. "The sky is still mostly dark," she began. "But there's a thin line of pale gold just above the water. It's like the night is a curtain being slowly lifted. The stars are still visible overhead, but they're fading as the light grows." David smiled, his face turned toward the ocean. "I can almost see it." They sat in companionable silence as the sun continued its ascent. Finally David spoke again. "I've been thinking about when we get home," he said. "I want you to be involved in the business if you're interested. Not because you're my wife, but because I think you're smart and insightful." Sarah blinked in surprise. "I don't have any business experience." This was true. Though Jennifer had studied business, Sarah's education had been in literature and art. "You have a fresh perspective," David said. "And you listen. That's rare in my world. Most people are so busy talking that they never hear what's actually being said." Sarah didn't know how to respond. The idea of working alongside David both thrilled and terrified her. More time together meant more chances for her deception to be discovered. "You don't have to decide now," David added. "Just think about it." "I will," Sarah promised. Later that day, as they walked along the beach, David asked about her family again. These questions always made Sarah nervous, forcing her to carefully navigate between truth and lies. "Do you miss them?" he asked. "Not really," Sarah admitted honestly. "Things have always been complicated with my parents." "Because of the pressure they put on you?" Sarah nodded, then remembered he couldn't see the gesture. "Yes. They had very specific expectations." "Like marrying me?" There was a hint of something in his voice, uncertainty perhaps. "That's different," Sarah said quickly. "Is it? Our families arranged this marriage for business reasons. That's hardly a romantic beginning." Sarah stopped walking, turning to face him even though he couldn't see her expression. "Do you regret it? Marrying me?" David was quiet for a long moment. "No," he finally said. "Whatever brought us together, I'm grateful for it. These past weeks with you have been. I've never felt so connected to someone before." The honesty in his voice made Sarah's chest ache. "I feel the same way," she whispered, and it was the complete truth. David reached for her hand, finding it unerringly. "When we get home, things will be different. More complicated. But I want you to know that what's happening between us, this connection, it matters to me. More than business, more than our family's expectations." Sarah stepped closer to him, resting her head against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her in the warm sunlight as the waves lapped at their feet. In that moment, Sarah made a decision. She would tell him the truth when they returned home. Whatever the consequences, she couldn't build a life with him based on a lie. He deserved better. They both did. What she didn't know was that events were already in motion that would force the truth into the open sooner than she planned. On their last night on the island, they had dinner on the beach under the stars. The staff had outdone themselves, creating a magical setting with soft lighting and music. "I have something for you," David said after they finished eating. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Sarah's heart fluttered as he opened it, revealing a delicate necklace with a pendant shaped like a raindrop. "For the woman who loves rainy days," he explained with a smile. "So you can carry a piece of what you love with you even on sunny days." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. It was the most thoughtful gift she had ever received. One meant specifically for her, not for Jennifer. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." David stood and came around behind her chair. With surprising dexterity, he fastened the necklace around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. "Perfect," he said, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. Sarah reached up to touch his hand. "David, when we get home, there's something I need to tell you." "That sounds serious," he said, returning to his seat. It is, she admitted. But not tonight. Tonight, I just want to be here with you. David nodded, respecting her wish to postpone the conversation. Then let's make the most of our last night in paradise. They walked along the beach afterward, talking about small things, both aware that something important hung between them, waiting to be addressed. When they returned to their villa, Sarah felt a new tension in the air. Standing in the moonlight filtering through the windows, David pulled her gently into his arms. Whatever you need to tell me, he said softly, know that these weeks with you have been the most real thing I've ever experienced. Sarah closed her eyes, memorizing the moment, knowing it might be their last before everything changed. When David kissed her, she kissed him back with all the emotion she'd been holding inside. The fear, the guilt, but most of all, the love that had grown despite everything. For tonight, she would allow herself this happiness. Tomorrow would come soon enough, bringing with it the truth and whatever consequences followed. The Wilson family estate sprawled across 30 acres of manicured grounds outside the city. As their car approached the massive stone house, Sarah felt her anxiety rising. Here, in David's family home, the chances of her deception being discovered multiplied. Staff who had known Jennifer, family friends, photographs she might not be aware of, any could expose the truth before she had a chance to tell David herself. Nervous? David asked, sensing her tension. A little, Sarah admitted. It's all so new. David took her hand. My family can be overwhelming, but they'll love you. Just be yourself. The ironic advice made Sarah wince. Being herself was exactly what she couldn't do. Mrs. Wilson was waiting for them in the grand foyer, a tall, elegant woman with silver-streaked dark hair and David's same strong features. Her calculating gaze swept over Sarah, and for a heart-stopping moment, Sarah was certain the older woman would call out the deception immediately. Instead, Mrs. Wilson smiled and stepped forward to embrace her. Welcome home, Jennifer dear. How was the honeymoon? Wonderful, Sarah replied, carefully matching Jennifer's speech patterns. The island was beautiful. David looks happy, Mrs. Wilson observed, turning to embrace her son. That's what matters most to me. The housekeeper showed them to David's wing of the house, a series of rooms designed specifically for his needs, with subtle tactile markers and an intuitive layout that allowed him to navigate independently. I had them prepare the blue suite for you, David told Sarah as they entered a beautifully appointed sitting room. You'll have your own adjoining bedroom and bathroom if you want privacy, but there's also access to my room. The thoughtfulness of the arrangement touched Sarah. He wasn't assuming they would continue the intimacy they had begun to explore on their honeymoon. He was giving her space choices. Thank you, she said softly. Over dinner that evening, Mrs. Wilson asked about their plans now that they were home. I've asked Jennifer to consider taking a role in the company, David said. Her perspective would be valuable. Mrs. Wilson raised an eyebrow. Really? I wasn't aware you had business interests, Jennifer. The question was a trap. Jennifer had studied business. Sarah had not. I don't have formal experience, Sarah said carefully. But I'm a quick learner. Mrs. Wilson's tone was neutral, but Sarah felt the weight of her scrutiny. After dinner, as they prepared for bed in their separate rooms, Sarah knew she couldn't delay the truth any longer. The longer she waited, the worse it would be when David discovered he had been lied to. She knocked softly on the door connecting their rooms. Come in, David called. He was sitting in an armchair by the window, already changed into pajama pants and a t-shirt. He turned his head toward the sound of the door opening. David, Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly. I need to tell you something important. Before she could continue, there was a sharp knock at the main door to his suite. David? It was his mother's voice. May I come in? It's urgent. David frowned. Can it wait, Mother? We were just about to talk. I'm afraid not, Mrs. Wilson replied, already opening the door. She stopped when she saw Sarah standing there in her nightgown. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this can't wait. David sighed. What is it? Mrs. Wilson stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Her expression was grave. I've just had a very disturbing phone call from Thomas Baker. Sarah didn't recognize the name, but David clearly did. His posture stiffened. Jennifer's ex-boyfriend? What did he want? Mrs. Wilson's gaze shifted to Sarah, cold and assessing. He claims that the woman you married is not Jennifer Cooper, but her sister, Sarah. Apparently, the real Jennifer ran away with him the night before the wedding. The room went completely silent. Sarah felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her feet. David had gone very still, his face unreadable behind his dark glasses. Is this true? He asked quietly. Sarah opened her mouth but no words came out. Her silence was answer enough. "I think," Mrs. Wilson said into the tense silence, "that we have a serious problem." David stood abruptly. "Mother, please leave us." "David." "Now, Mother. This is between me and—" He hesitated. "My wife." Mrs. Wilson looked like she wanted to argue, but something in her son's expression stopped her. With a final cold glance at Sarah, she left the room, closing the door firmly behind her. When they were alone, David removed his dark glasses, revealing eyes that stared sightlessly ahead. Without the glasses, his face seemed more vulnerable, more human. "Tell me the truth," he said simply. "All of it." Sarah sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. "My name is Sarah Cooper. Jennifer is my older sister. She was supposed to marry you, but she ran away with her boyfriend the night before the wedding." The words tumbled out, the truth she had been carrying for weeks finally released. She told him everything: her parents' desperation, their insistence that she take Jennifer's place, the deception they had planned and executed. "They said you would never know," she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "That by the time you found out, if you ever did, the business merger would be complete." David hadn't moved or spoken during her confession. Now he turned away from her, facing the window. "I was going to tell you tonight," Sarah said desperately. "That's why I knocked on your door. I couldn't live with the lie anymore. Not after everything." "Everything," David repeated, his voice flat. "You mean after I fell in love with a woman who doesn't exist?" The word struck Sarah like a physical blow. "No. I mean, yes, I lied about who I was, but everything else, everything that happened between us, that was real. That was me." David laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "How would I know that? How would I know anything about you is real?" "Because you know me," Sarah insisted. "You know me better than anyone ever has." "I thought I knew Jennifer," he corrected. "A woman who agreed to an arranged marriage for business reasons. Who was I actually getting to know on that island?" "Who are you, Sarah?" The way he said her name, her real name, made Sarah's heart twist. There was confusion in his voice and hurt, but also a hint of curiosity. "I'm the woman who loves rainy days," she said quietly. "Who described sunsets to you? Who feels more real with you than I ever have with anyone else? I lied about my name, about my past, but I never lied about who I am." David was silent for a long moment. Then he put his glasses back on, his expression once again unreadable. "I need time to think," he said finally. "This is a lot to process." Sarah nodded, then remembered he couldn't see the gesture. "I understand. I'll go back to my room." She stood to leave but paused at the connecting door. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not for getting to know you, but for how it started. You deserved better than a lie." David didn't respond, and Sarah quietly closed the door behind her. In the solitude of her own room, she finally allowed the tears to fall, wondering if she had lost everything just when she had found something worth having. Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment she was disoriented, still half dreaming of the island. Then reality crashed back. The return home, the phone call, the truth finally revealed. She sat up, noticing an envelope that had been slipped under her door sometime while she slept. With trembling fingers she opened it. "I've gone to the office for the day. We need to talk, but I need time first. Please stay at the house. My mother has been asked not to interfere. David." The note was printed in Braille with a typed translation beneath. Formal, distant, but not dismissive. "You wanted to talk. That was something, at least." Sarah dressed and ventured out of her room, half expecting to find Mrs. Wilson waiting to evict her. Instead, the house seemed eerily quiet. A maid informed her that Mrs. Wilson had gone out for the day and offered to bring breakfast to Sarah's room. Sarah ate very little, her stomach too knotted with anxiety to accommodate food. With nothing else to do, she began exploring David's wing of the house. She had been too nervous yesterday to notice details, but now she saw the careful planning in every room, the subtle textural differences in wallpaper that marked transitions, the consistent placement of furniture, the lack of unnecessary obstacles. In what appeared to be a study, she found bookshelves filled with Braille volumes alongside conventional books. A computer on the desk had a Braille keyboard and what looked like specialized software. This was David's private domain, a place adapted specifically for his needs. Sarah was about to leave when a framed photograph on the wall caught her eye. It showed a younger David, perhaps in his early 20s, with his arm around a laughing young woman. They were standing on what looked like a college campus, both dressed in graduation gowns. "That's Rebecca, my sister," came a voice from the doorway. Sarah whirled around to find David standing there. She hadn't heard him return. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I shouldn't have been snooping." David stepped into the room. He had changed from the business suit he must have worn to the office into more casual clothes. Jeans and a sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. "It's all right," he said. "I came home early. I couldn't focus at work." An awkward silence fell between them, so different from the easy conversations they had shared on the island. "Your note said we should talk," Sarah said finally. David nodded. "I've been thinking about nothing else since last night." He moved to a chair and sat down, gesturing for Sarah to do the same. "I have questions." "I'll answer anything," Sarah promised, taking the seat across from him. "Why did you agree to it? To marrying a stranger under false pretenses?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "At first, because I felt I had no choice. My parents were desperate. Jennifer was gone. They made it clear that this marriage had to happen or they would lose everything." "And later? On the island? Why continue the deception then?" "I tried to tell you in my way," Sarah said. "When I talked about being in my sister's shadow. That was the truth. I've spent my whole life being compared to Jennifer and found wanting. She was always the special one, the beautiful one, the successful one. But you could have told me outright. At any time." Sarah nodded. "I know. I should have. But I was afraid." She paused. "And then I started to care about you and I was even more afraid. I knew that when you found out the truth, whatever was growing between us would be over. I wanted to hold on to it a little longer." David was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful behind his dark glasses. "Did you ever wonder why I agreed to an arranged marriage? Why I would marry a woman I hardly knew?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "I assumed it was for business reasons. The merger between our family's companies." "That was part of it," David acknowledged. "But there was more. I'm 35 years old, Sarah. I've dated, I've had relationships. But they always ended the same way. The women I met were either uncomfortable with my blindness or fascinated by it as a novelty. Few of them ever saw past it to who I actually am." He leaned forward slightly. "When our parents arranged this marriage, I agreed because I was tired. Tired of the dating scene, tired of being a curiosity, tired of being alone. Jennifer seemed nice enough during our formal meetings. I thought maybe an arranged marriage had a better chance of success than my previous attempts at finding connection." Sarah didn't know what to say. She hadn't considered David's perspective before, his reasons for agreeing to the arrangement in the first place. "Then on our honeymoon," David continued, "something unexpected happened. I started to know a woman who was thoughtful and kind, who described the world to me in ways no one ever had before, who seemed to see me, really see me, despite my blindness." He paused. "Was that woman real, Sarah? Or was she just another act?" "She was real," Sarah whispered. "I've never been more myself than I was with you on that island. For the first time in my life, someone was seeing me for who I actually am, not comparing me to my sister." David stood and walked to the window, his movements confident in the familiar space. "The irony isn't lost on me," he said with a hint of bitterness. The blind man who thought he finally saw someone clearly. "David, I need to ask you something and I need an honest answer," he interrupted. "Did you ever, at any point, think about staying in this deception indefinitely? About never telling me the truth?" Sarah considered lying, but she had done enough of that. "Yes," she admitted. "There were moments when I imagined just being Jennifer forever. Starting a new life where no one compared me to her. Where I could just be the person you thought I was." David nodded slowly. "At least that's honest." "But I couldn't do it," Sarah added. "Not just because it would be wrong, but because I wanted you to know me. The real me. That's why I was going to tell you last night." David turned back toward her. "I believe you about that part, at least. The timing of your mother-in-law's dramatic entrance was too perfect to be planned." A glimmer of hope sparked in Sarah's chest. "So what happens now?" "I don't know," David admitted. "Legally, our marriage is probably invalid since it was entered under false pretenses. The business merger is in jeopardy. My mother is furious. Your parents are probably panicking. I don't care about any of that," Sarah said. "I only care about what this means for us." David removed his dark glasses again, rubbing the bridge of his nose tiredly. "That's the question, isn't it? Is there an us at all? Or was everything built on a lie?" "Not everything," Sarah insisted. "The way we connected, the things we shared, those were real." "Perhaps," David conceded. "But trust has been broken. That's not easily repaired." Sarah felt tears threatening again. "I understand if you can't forgive me. I'll go if that's what you want. Is that what you want? David asked. No, Sarah answered without hesitation. What I want is impossible. I want to go back to that island where we were just two people getting to know each other, where there were no lies between us. David was quiet for a long moment. We can't go back, he finally said. But perhaps we can start over. He extended his hand in her direction. Hello. I'm David Wilson. Sarah stared at his outstretched hand, hardly daring to hope. Slowly she reached out and took it. Sarah Cooper, she said, her voice shaking slightly. It's nice to meet you. David's lips curved in the hint of a smile. Sarah Cooper, he repeated as if testing the name. Tell me something about yourself, Sarah. Something true. The days that followed were strange and tentative. David went to work each day, returning in the evenings to have dinner with Sarah. They talked carefully, like new acquaintances, learning details about each other that the deception had obscured. Sarah told him about her studies in literature and art, so different from Jennifer's business background. She shared stories of her childhood, always being one step behind her sister, never quite measuring up to her parents' expectations. I wanted to be a teacher, she confessed one evening as they sat in his study. But my parents thought it wasn't prestigious enough. Jennifer was going to take over the family business someday. I was just extra. David listened, asking questions, building a picture of the real Sarah in his mind. In turn, he shared more about himself, his childhood, his education, the challenges and advantages of navigating the world without sight. Mrs. Wilson remained coldly civil, clearly disapproving of the situation but respecting her son's wishes that Sarah be treated as his guest. The legal and business complications remained unresolved, hanging over their tentative new relationship like storm clouds. A week after the truth had come out, David came home earlier than usual. Sarah was in the garden reading when he found her. I had an interesting phone call today, he said without preamble. Sarah closed her book. Oh. From your sister. Sarah's heart jumped. Jennifer called you? David sat on the bench beside her. Apparently, she heard about the situation from your parents. She wanted to apologize for running away and causing all this trouble. That's surprising, Sarah said carefully. Jennifer had never been one to admit fault. She also mentioned something interesting, David continued. She said that your parents are the ones who reached out to Thomas Baker, telling him to call my mother with the truth. They were upset that you weren't pushing forward with the business merger quickly enough. Sarah felt sick. They wanted to force your hand. Make you angry enough to either divorce me or pressure me to complete the merger before that happened. That was my interpretation as well, David agreed. Your parents seem quite determined to secure their financial interests, one way or another. I'm sorry, Sarah said. I should have known they wouldn't just let things be. David turned toward her, his expression serious behind his glasses. Jennifer also told me that she never wanted to marry me in the first place. That our courtship was entirely orchestrated by your parents and mine. That every conversation we had was scripted and rehearsed beforehand. Sarah winced. That sounds like Jennifer. And like my parents. So it seems, David said, that I never knew Jennifer at all. The woman I thought I was getting to know during our arranged meetings was as much a fiction as the Jennifer I married. I suppose that's true, Sarah agreed cautiously. Which means, David continued, that the only real connection I've ever had was with you. On that island. When you were being yourself, even if you were using your sister's name. Sarah's breath caught. David. I've been thinking about this all week, he interrupted. Trying to separate what was real from what wasn't. And I keep coming back to the same conclusion. I got to know a woman I care deeply about. A woman who sees me as a person, not a condition. Who makes me laugh. Who describes the world in ways that make me see it anew. He paused. That woman is you, Sarah. Not Jennifer. Hope bloomed in Sarah's chest, but she forced herself to be cautious. I care about you too. But there's still the matter of trust. Of beginning with a lie. Yes, David acknowledged. That's why I've made a decision. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. These are annulment papers. If you sign them, our marriage will be legally dissolved. The merger between our family's companies will not go forward. Sarah's heart sank. So this was it, he had decided to end things after all. She took the envelope with numb fingers. I understand, she whispered. Do you? David asked. Because there's more. If you sign those papers, I'd like to ask you to dinner tomorrow night. Sarah blinked in confusion. Dinner? Yes. A proper first date. No pretending, no family pressure, no business dealings. Just two people who are interested in getting to know each other better. He smiled slightly. I thought we could start over. For real this time. Understanding dawned on Sarah. You want to annul our marriage, so we can date? Our marriage began with a lie, David said simply. I don't want that to be our foundation. If something is going to grow between us, something real and lasting, it should start with truth. With choice. Sarah opened the envelope and looked at the papers inside. This wasn't an ending, she realized. It was a beginning. Will your mother be upset? She asked. David laughed. Undoubtedly. But it's not her life. It's mine. And I want the chance to choose who I share it with, not have that choice made for me by business interests or family pressure. What about your company's deal with my parents' business? There are other ways to structure a partnership that don't involve marriage, David said dismissively. Besides, I'm more interested in what you want right now than what our parents want. Sarah looked up at him, at the man she had come to care for so deeply during their strange journey together. I want a chance, she said. A real chance with no lies between us. Then sign the papers, David said, and say you'll have dinner with me tomorrow. Sarah found a pen in her purse and signed her real name to the annulment documents. As she did, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time since this all began, she was making a choice for herself. I'd love to have dinner with you tomorrow, David, she said, handing the signed papers back to him. David's smile was warm and genuine. It's a date, Sarah Cooper. Our first real one. As they sat together in the garden, Sarah realized that ending their false marriage might be the first step toward something authentic. Something built on truth rather than deception. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in Jennifer's shadow. She was simply Sarah, a woman worthy of being chosen for herself. Sarah moved out of David's family estate the next day, checking into a hotel in the city. It was a practical decision. They were no longer married after all, but it also felt symbolically important. If they were truly starting over, they needed space from the circumstances that had brought them together under false pretenses. Mrs. Wilson had been predictably upset by the annulment, but David had stood firm. This is my life, Mother, he had told her calmly. I'm making my own choices now. Sarah spent the afternoon getting ready for their date with butterflies in her stomach. It was strange to be nervous about having dinner with a man she had already married, lived with, and grown close to. But this was different. Tonight there would be no deception, no pretending. Just Sarah and David, seeing if the connection they had felt was strong enough to survive in the light of truth. He picked her up at the hotel, arriving with a driver who would take them to the restaurant. When Sarah walked into the lobby, she found David waiting, dressed in a well-tailored suit, looking handsome and slightly nervous himself. Hi, she said as she approached. David turned toward the sound of her voice, smiling. You sound beautiful, he said. Sarah laughed. That's quite a trick. Your voice is higher when you're happy, David explained. More musical. And you're wearing perfume, something light and floral. Not the one Jennifer always wore. You noticed that? Sarah was surprised. I notice everything about you, David said simply. Shall we go? The restaurant was elegant but not ostentatious, a place where they could talk without too much distraction. After they ordered, there was a moment of awkwardness, as if neither knew quite how to begin now that all the secrets were gone. This is weird, isn't it? Sarah finally said with a nervous laugh. We lived together for weeks and now we're acting like we just met. David's expression relaxed. It is strange. But also necessary, I think. We need to establish who we are to each other without all the baggage. So who are we? Sarah asked. What are we doing here, David? He reached across the table and Sarah put her hand in his. We're two people who met under bizarre circumstances, he said. Who got to know each other in a genuine way despite those circumstances. And who are now trying to figure out if what we felt was real or just a product of our situation. And what do you think so far? Sarah asked, her heart pounding. David squeezed her hand. I think I missed you today. Even though we were only apart for a few hours. I missed you too, Sarah admitted. The awkwardness began to fade as they talked. Without the pressure of maintaining a deception, Sarah found herself more relaxed, more authentic than she had ever been with David. She told him about her dream of opening an art school for children someday. He shared his plans for expanding his company into new markets. By the time dessert arrived, they were laughing together like old friends, which, in a strange way, they were. Have you heard from your parents? David asked as they shared a chocolate souffle. Sarah's smile faded. They've called several times. I haven't answered. You'll have to talk to them eventually. I know, she sighed. But right now I'm angry. They used me. They were willing to sacrifice my happiness for their financial security. And then they tried to sabotage things when I wasn't playing my part exactly as they wanted. David nodded. You have every right to be angry. Just don't let that anger define your future. What about your mother? Sarah asked. Is she still furious about the annulment? She'll get over it, David said dismissively. She's more concerned about the business implications than anything else. But I've made it clear that my personal life and my business decisions are separate matters now. After dinner, they walked through a nearby park, Sarah describing the night-blooming flowers and the way the moonlight reflected off the small lake. It reminded her of their evenings on the island, but with an important difference. Now there were no secrets between them. I have a confession, David said as they sat on a bench overlooking the water. Sarah tensed. What is it? Remember that experimental procedure I told you about? The one my parents wanted me to try when I was 16 that might have restored some vision? Yes, Sarah said. You said you refused. I did. But there's a new version of it now. My doctors brought it up last year before I met you, or Jennifer, rather. The success rate is much higher, though it's still not guaranteed. Sarah turned to look at him. Are you considering it? David was quiet for a moment. I've always defined myself by my blindness in some ways. It's part of who I am, how I experience the world. But lately I've been thinking about what it might be like to see. To see colors, shapes, faces. Your face, he added softly. I know what you feel like, what you sound like. But I don't know what you look like. Sarah's heart raced. Would you want to? See me, I mean. Yes, David admitted. But it's a big decision. The procedure has risks. And even if it works, my vision wouldn't be perfect. More like seeing through a fog, they say. Plus, I'd have to learn how to process visual information after a lifetime of blindness. When would you do it? Sarah asked. I have a consultation next week. If I decide to go forward, the procedure would be scheduled for about a month from now. Sarah took his hand. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But David, you should know, I fell for you exactly as you are. Your blindness doesn't define you to me, but it's part of who you are. I don't need you to see me to know that what we have is real. David smiled, lifting her hand to his lips. Thank you for that. It means more than you know. When they returned to her hotel, David walked her to the lobby. I had a wonderful time tonight, he said. Our first real date. The first of many, I hope, Sarah replied. Definitely, David agreed. But we should take things slowly. Get to know each other properly this time. Sarah nodded, then remembered he couldn't see the gesture. I'd like that. David leaned in and kissed her cheek. Good night, Sarah Cooper. The real one. As she watched him leave, Sarah touched her cheek where his lips had been. It felt like the beginning of something authentic. Something that, unlike their marriage, had the potential to last. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and David fell into a new routine. They had dinner together most evenings, sometimes at restaurants, sometimes at David's house, occasionally at Sarah's new apartment. She had found a small place in the city and a job teaching art at a community center. Both small steps toward independence. They were careful with each other, building trust slowly. There were no more lies between them, but also none of the physical intimacy they had begun to explore during their honeymoon. They were dating in the traditional sense, getting to know each other, sharing experiences, creating memories untainted by deception. Sarah had finally spoken to her parents, a tense conversation that had ended with her making it clear that she was making her own choices now. They had been upset about the annulment and what it meant for their business prospects, but Sarah refused to let them manipulate her any longer. I'm not a pawn for you to sacrifice, she had told them firmly. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be on different terms. David, meanwhile, had his consultation about the eye procedure. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, though they emphasized that the results would not be perfect vision, and there was a significant adjustment period. I've decided to do it, he told Sarah one evening as they walked along the riverfront. The surgery is scheduled for next month. Sarah squeezed his hand. Are you nervous? Terrified, he admitted. I've never seen anything, Sarah. I don't know what it will be like to suddenly have visual input after 35 years of darkness. The doctor said it would be limited, right? Not full vision. David nodded. Yes. More like shadows and shapes at first, possibly some color eventually. They've warned me it will be disorienting and that my brain will need time to learn how to process visual information. Why did you decide to do it? Sarah asked curiously. You've always been so confident navigating without sight. David was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Partly curiosity, he finally said. I've heard people describe the world my whole life. I'd like to experience some version of it for myself, even if it's imperfect." He paused. "And partly because of you." "Me?" Sarah was surprised. "David, I never wanted you to change." "I know that," he assured her. "But meeting you, it made me realize I've been using my blindness as a shield in some ways. Keeping people at a distance because it was safer. You made me want to experience more, to take risks I've been avoiding." Sarah didn't know what to say. The idea that she had inspired such a significant decision was both flattering and terrifying. "I just want you to be happy," she said finally. "Whatever that means for you." "I am happy," David said simply. "Happier than I've been in a long time. And that's because of you, Sarah." The weeks leading up to David's surgery passed quickly. Sarah helped him prepare, reading about the procedure and the recovery process. David's mother, surprisingly, had come around to supporting his decision, even offering to help with his care afterward. The night before the surgery, they had a quiet dinner at David's house. He seemed preoccupied, more nervous than Sarah had ever seen him. "What if it changes everything?" he asked as they sat in his study afterward. "What if seeing the world makes me a different person?" Sarah moved to sit beside him on the couch. "You'll still be you, David. Your kindness, your intelligence, your terrible jokes. Those won't change just because you might be able to see shadows and shapes." He smiled slightly at that. "My jokes are excellent." "They're really not," Sarah laughed. "But I like them anyway." David reached for her hand. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I've been thinking about a lot lately." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "When we met, or when I thought I was meeting Jennifer, I was willing to enter an arranged marriage because I didn't think I would ever find real love. I thought maybe a partnership based on mutual respect and compatibility was the best I could hope for." He paused, his expression serious. "But then on that island I started to feel something I wasn't expecting. Something I tried to resist at first because it complicated everything. I started to fall in love with the woman I thought was Jennifer." Sarah's breath caught. "David." "Let me finish," he said gently. "When I found out the truth, I was hurt and angry. I felt betrayed. But as the days passed, I realized something important. It wasn't Jennifer I had fallen for. It was you. The real you that shone through despite the deception." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Sarah Cooper. Not because of some arrangement, not because of business or family expectations. I love you because of who you are, your kindness, your thoughtfulness, the way you see the world and help me see it too." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I've loved you since that night on the beach when you asked me to describe the sunset." David smiled, reaching up to touch her face, his fingers gentle as they traced her features. "I may see shadows tomorrow or shapes or nothing at all. The procedure might not work. But it doesn't matter. I already see you, Sarah. I see who you really are." He leaned forward, finding her lips with unerring accuracy, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. It was different from their kisses on the island. Deeper, more meaningful, because it was built on truth rather than deception. "Whatever happens tomorrow," David whispered against her lips, "we'll face it together." Sarah wrapped her arms around him, holding him close. "Together," she agreed. Tomorrow would bring uncertainty. A procedure with no guarantees, the possibility of change, the beginning of a new chapter. But for tonight, they had this moment of perfect understanding, of love acknowledged and returned. Sarah sat in the hospital waiting room, nervously turning the pages of a magazine without registering any of the words. David had been in surgery for over 2 hours. Mrs. Wilson sat across from her, equally tense but maintaining her composure. Their relationship had thawed considerably in recent weeks. After seeing how much Sarah genuinely cared for her son, the older woman had grudgingly accepted her presence in David's life. "He's never made a decision like this before," Mrs. Wilson said suddenly. "The surgery. He always refused even to consider it." Sarah looked up. "He told me. He said he didn't want to change how he experienced the world." Mrs. Wilson nodded. "That was what he always said. But I think he was afraid." "Of what?" Sarah asked. "Of disappointment. Of hoping for too much." Mrs. Wilson's expression softened. "You gave him courage, Sarah. Whatever happens between you two in the future, I'm grateful for that." Before Sarah could respond, the doctor appeared in the doorway. Both women stood immediately. "The surgery went well," the doctor said with a cautious smile. "We won't know the results for a while, but technically, everything went according to plan." "Can we see him?" Sarah asked. "He's in recovery now. His eyes are bandaged and they'll need to stay that way for at least a week while he heals. He's asking for you, the doctor added, looking at Sarah. Mrs. Wilson touched Sarah's arm. Go ahead. Tell him I'm here and I'll see him soon. Sarah nodded gratefully and followed the doctor to the recovery room. David was lying in bed, thick bandages covering his eyes and wrapped around his head. He looked pale but alert. David, Sarah said softly, moving to his side. It's me. His hand reached out and she took it immediately. Hey, he said, his voice slightly groggy from the anesthesia. How long was I out? A few hours, Sarah told him, squeezing his hand. The doctor said everything went well. David nodded slightly. I feel like I have the world's worst headache but otherwise okay. 1 week of bandages, they said. Then we'll know. Your mother's here, Sarah told him. She sends her love. That doesn't sound like my mother, David said with a weak smile. Sarah laughed. Okay, she didn't say that exactly. But she's been worried about you. And you? David asked. How are you holding up? I'm fine, Sarah assured him. Just relieved the surgery is over. The next week was the longest of Sarah's life. David remained in the hospital for 2 days before being released with strict instructions to keep the bandages in place and avoid any strain. Sarah stayed at his house, helping him navigate a world he had always moved through confidently but that now felt strange with the disorientation from the surgery. They talked for hours, about the future, about possibilities, about their fears. David admitted he was terrified of what would happen when the bandages came off. What if I see nothing? What if I see something but it's too overwhelming? What if I can't adjust? Sarah listened, offering reassurance when she could, honesty when she couldn't. Whatever happens, she told him repeatedly, we'll handle it together. Finally, the day arrived to remove the bandages. They returned to the hospital where the procedure had been performed. The doctor explained the process carefully. When I remove these bandages, David, the room will be very dim. Even minimal light might be overwhelming at first if the procedure was successful. We'll increase the light very gradually to see what level of vision you have. Remember, even in the best-case scenario, you won't have perfect sight. But you might have some useful vision. David nodded, his expression a mixture of hope and fear. He reached for Sarah's hand. Stay with me? Always, she promised. The doctor began unwrapping the bandages slowly, layer by layer. Sarah held her breath, watching David's face for any reaction. When the last bandage was removed, David's eyes remained closed. Take your time, the doctor said gently. Open your eyes whenever you're ready. David squeezed Sarah's hand so tightly it almost hurt. Slowly, he opened his eyes in the dimly lit room. For a long moment, he was completely still, his expression unreadable. Then tears began streaming down his face. David? Sarah whispered anxiously. What is it? What do you see? Shadows, he said, his voice choked with emotion. Movement. Light and dark. He turned toward where the doctor stood. Are you there? Yes, the doctor confirmed, excitement in his voice. Can you see my outline? Not clearly. But I can see something moving when you move. It's incredible. David turned his face toward Sarah. Sarah? Where are you? I'm right here, she said, touching his face gently. Right in front of you. David blinked rapidly, tears still falling. I can see a shape. I think it's you. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. Sarah started crying too, overwhelmed by the moment. You can't even see me clearly yet, she said through her tears. I don't need to, David replied, reaching out to touch her face. I already know you're beautiful. Now I can just see a hint of it too. Over the next few hours, the doctors conducted various tests, gradually increasing the light in the room. David's vision was limited, mostly shadows and shapes, some ability to detect movement, and the beginnings of distinguishing very bright colors. But it was more than he had ever had before. This is just the beginning, the doctor explained. Your brain needs to learn how to process visual information. It will be disorienting and difficult at times. But with therapy and practice, your useful vision will likely improve over the coming months. When they left the hospital that afternoon, David experienced his first sunset, not through Sarah's descriptions but through his own newly functioning eyes. It's more beautiful than I imagined, he said as they sat in the car, watching the sky change colors. The way the light fades. I never understood what that really meant until now. Sarah watched him taking in the world with new eyes, his expression one of wonder and occasional confusion. It would be a long adjustment period, the doctors had warned. There would be frustration and setbacks alongside the victories. But in this moment, seeing the joy on David's face as he experienced the sunset for the first time, Sarah knew they would navigate whatever came next, together. 6 months later, David and Sarah stood on the beach of a familiar private island in the Caribbean. His vision had improved significantly with therapy and practice, though it remained limited, mostly shapes and movement, some colors and good lighting. But it was enough to fundamentally change how he experienced the world. "This is where it all began," Sarah said, looking out at the ocean. "Where we got to know each other, despite everything." David smiled, taking her hand. "It seems fitting to come back here now." They walked along the shoreline as the sun began to set, painting the sky in colors David could now partially perceive. "I have something to ask you," he said, stopping and turning to face her. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. He opened it to reveal a delicate ring with a raindrop-shaped diamond, a callback to the raindrop necklace he had given her during their first stay on the island. "Sarah Cooper," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "We began with a lie but found truth along the way. I've seen the world through your eyes and now through my own, and there's nothing I want more than to keep experiencing it with you by my side." He knelt on the sand before her. "Will you marry me? For real this time?" Sarah felt tears of joy streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." As David slipped the ring onto her finger, Sarah marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a deception born of desperation to a love built on truth and understanding. From darkness into light. When David stood and pulled her into his arms, Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on her face, the sound of waves crashing on the shore, the beating of his heart against hers. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "The real you. Always." "And I love you," Sarah replied. "Just as you are." In that perfect moment, with the sun setting on one chapter of their lives and rising on another, Sarah knew that the unexpected path that had brought them together had led exactly where they were meant to be all along.